The world ended not with a bang, but with the splintering crack of wood and the terrified scream of a horse. For Julian Blackwood, the Marquess of Ashworth, London's most celebrated and notorious rake, it was a profoundly undignified conclusion. One moment he was racing his phaeton through the mist-shrouded lanes of Hertfordshire on a drunken wager. The next, the world was a violent, tumbling kaleidoscope of dark green and bruised gray. His head connected with something unforgivingly solid, and a flash of white-hot pain seared through his skull before everything dissolved into a silent, velvety black. He did not know how long he floated in that void. Time became a meaningless concept, a river without banks. Sensations returned in fragments, like shards of a broken mirror. The damp, earthy scent of moss and rotting leaves. The cold seep of rain through fine wool. A throbbing, rhythmic agony behind his eyes that was his own pulse. He tried to move, and a fresh wave of nausea forced a groan from his lips. A sound, soft and hesitant, cut through the muffled silence of his pain. "Hello? Is someone there?" He tried to open his eyes, but the dim light of the overcast day was a needle-sharp assault. He managed a slit, his vision swimming, and saw a blur of gray and brown hovering at the edge of his perception. "Sir? Can you hear me?" The voice was female, young, and laced with a fear that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. He tried to form a word, to demand to know where he was, who she was, but his tongue was a thick, useless piece of leather in his mouth. All that emerged was another pained grunt. He felt a gentle, cool touch on his forehead, a startling contrast to the feverish heat of his skin. The touch withdrew as if burned. "You're injured," the voice stated, the fear now tempered with a thread of resolve. "Your carriage, it's quite destroyed. I think I must get you to shelter. My cottage is not far." "Cottage? Carriage?" The words rattled in his mind, empty shells. He had no context for them. A more pressing terror began to uncoil in his gut, cold and slick. He focused his swimming vision on the figure, who was now kneeling beside him. She was swathed in a worn gray cloak, the hood fallen back to reveal a face that was pale and sprinkled with a faint dusting of freckles. Her hair was a plain, mousy brown, pulled into a simple, severe knot at the nape of her neck. Her eyes, wide and the color of a twilight sky, held his gaze. They were filled with a startling intelligence and a deep, well-hidden sorrow. But they were the eyes of a stranger. He forced his voice to work, the sound a dry rasp. "Who?" "My name is Eleanor," she said softly. "Eleanor Hartwell. And you are." She stopped, her brow furrowing. She looked from his face, down his body, taking in the exquisitely tailored, now torn and muddied riding coat, the fine leather of his boots. Her eyes widened slightly, and a strange, almost calculating expression flickered across her features. There and gone so quickly, he thought he might have imagined it. It was replaced by a look of dawning, desperate inspiration. She took a deep, shaky breath, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "You are Julian Blackwood," she said, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "The Marquess of Ashworth. And you are my fiancé." The words hung in the damp air, nonsensical. Fiancé. The term felt alien, a weightless abstraction. He searched his mind for any connection to the name Eleanor Hartwell, for any flicker of recognition, any memory of a betrothal, of love, of anything at all. There was nothing, just a vast, echoing emptiness. The panic tightened its grip. I don't remember," he whispered, the admission tasting like ash. "I know," she said, and her voice was surprisingly gentle. "You've hit your head. But it's true. We are engaged to be married. We were on our way to my family's home when you decided to take a reckless shortcut. You must believe me." He looked into her eyes, this quiet, plain girl who claimed to hold the key to his identity. He saw no malice there, only a profound, desperate anxiety. Why would she lie? What could she possibly gain from such a deception? In the void of his own mind, her words were the only anchor he had. "Ashworth?" he repeated, testing the title. It felt no more familiar than John or Thomas. "Yes," Eleanor said, her shoulders relaxing a fraction. "Now, we must get you out of this rain. Can you stand, my lord? If you lean on me?" It was a slow, agonizing process. Every movement sent fresh jolts of pain through his skull. He was a large man, tall and broad-shouldered, and she was slight, her frame slender beneath the coarse wool of her cloak. Yet she bore his weight with a stubborn determination, her small body trembling with the effort as she half-dragged, half-supported him along a narrow, muddy path through the woods. The cottage, when they reached it, was small and humble, filled with the scent of dried herbs and beeswax. It was clearly a place of limited means, a far cry from whatever grandeur a marquis should be accustomed to, though he had no memory of that grandeur to compare it to. She helped him onto a narrow bed in a tiny room, and as she began to clean the cut on his forehead with a cloth dipped in cool water, he watched her. He saw the careful way she avoided his gaze, the slight tremor in her hands. He saw the way she bit her lip, a nervous habit. And in the deep, silent cavern of his lost memory, the first faint seed of doubt took root. The next few days passed in a hazy blur of pain and confusion. Julian drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams fragmented and terrifying, flashes of a laughing crowd, the glint of candlelight off crystal, the feel of cool silk sheets, all of it dissolving into the image of a dark, menacing shadow with no face. He would wake with a start, his heart pounding, the unfamiliar, low ceiling of the cottage pressing down on him. Eleanor was a constant, quiet presence. She brought him broth, changed his bandages, and sat in a chair by the window, mending clothes or reading a book. She was a study in stillness, a wallflower who had perfected the art of invisibility. Yet, he began to see the sharp mind behind the quiet demeanor. She was observant, her gaze missing nothing. On the third day, as his head began to clear, he propped himself up on the pillows. "Tell me," he said, his voice still rough. "Tell me about us." Eleanor, who had been stirring the fire, went very still. She did not turn around. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. How we met. Why we are engaged. What I am like." He paused, the next question the most difficult. "What was I like?" She turned slowly, her face a careful mask. "We met at a ball in London. Last season. You were the center of attention. Charming, witty, a little reckless." A faint blush touched her cheeks. "I was standing by the potted palms, as I usually do. You came over and asked me to dance. No one else had all evening." The story sounded like a scene from a bad novel. The dashing lord and the wallflower. It was trite, unbelievable. And yet, in his emptiness, he had no evidence to refute it. "And I fell in love with you," he asked, his tone flat. "You said you were captivated by my quiet intelligence," she said, her gaze dropping to her hands. "You said the simpering debutantes bored you. You pursued me with a single-minded determination that quite shocked my family." "Your family," he seized on the topic. "Tell me about them." A shadow crossed her face, genuine and deep. "My father is deceased. My mother, she is a kind woman but weak. It is my uncle, Sir Reginald Hartwell, who is my guardian. He has arranged a marriage for me, to a man named Mr. Silas Grange." The way she said the name, with a barely suppressed shudder, told him everything. "Grange," Julian prompted. "He is a merchant. From the north. Older. His manners are coarse and his character is questionable. The marriage is for his money, to shore up our family's failing fortunes. It was to escape this match that we." She gestured vaguely around the cottage. "I have a small inheritance from a great aunt, enough for this cottage. We were coming here, to be married in secret at the local parish, before my uncle could force me into the union with Grange. The pieces fit together with a neat, convenient logic. The dashing lord rescues the damsel in distress. It was a narrative he felt he should recognize, a trope from the plays and books that hovered just beyond the edge of his memory. But the man she described, the reckless, charming hero, felt like a complete stranger. He could no more imagine being that man than he could imagine flying. "And what of my family?" he asked. "Do they know of this elopement?" A flicker of panic in her eyes. "No. You are something of a black sheep, my lord. Your parents are gone. You have a younger sister, Lady Beatrice, but you are not close. You said you did not care for their opinion. You said you only cared for me." He lay back, exhausted by the effort of conversation and the weight of this fabricated life. He closed his eyes, and a single, clear memory surfaced. The feel of reins in his hands, the powerful surge of a horse beneath him, the wind whipping through his hair. A feeling of absolute freedom, of wild, untamed joy. It was a feeling entirely at odds with the man bound by a secret engagement to a quiet, desperate girl in a tiny cottage. When he opened his eyes, he found her watching him, her expression a mixture of hope and terror. "Very well, Miss Hartwell," he said, the formality feeling strange on his tongue. "It seems I have a role to play." The role of the devoted fiancé was a difficult one for a man with no memory of his own lines. Julian moved through the next week like an actor in a play he had never rehearsed. He was to be gentle, attentive, protective. These were not instincts that came naturally to the ghost of the man he had been. A restless energy thrummed beneath his skin, a desire for action, for speed, for something more than the quiet, cloistered existence of the cottage. He watched Eleanor. He saw how she jumped at every sound from the lane, how her face would pale whenever a stranger passed by the cottage gate. Her fear was real. That much he was certain of. One afternoon, a stout, red-faced man on a stout, red-faced horse trotted up to the gate. Eleanor, who had been hanging laundry, froze, her hands clutching a wet sheet as if it were a lifeline. "Miss Hartwell," the man boomed, dismounting. He was dressed in clothes that were expensive but garish, a velvet waistcoat straining over a substantial belly. "I was in the area on business and thought I'd check on my investment." Julian, who had been splitting wood, a menial task that felt strangely satisfying, straightened up, the axe resting easily in his hands. He did not need an introduction. This was Silas Grange. Eleanor found her voice, though it was thin and reedy. "Mr. Grange. This is a surprise." Grange's small, piggy eyes slid from Eleanor to Julian, taking in his tall, powerful frame, the confident way he held the axe, the aristocratic cast of his features that even a head injury and simple clothes could not disguise. A frown creased his brow. "And who is this?" Grange asked, his tone implying Julian was something he had just scraped off his boot. Before Eleanor could stammer out a reply, Julian stepped forward. He didn't know how to be a fiancé, but he knew, on a bone-deep level, how to be a lord. He let his gaze sweep over Grange with a cool, dismissive arrogance that came from a place deeper than memory. "Julian Blackwood," he said, his voice low and carrying. "The Marquess of Ashworth. And you are addressing my future wife." The effect was instantaneous. Grange's jaw went slack. He looked from Julian to Eleanor and back again, confusion and fury warring on his face. "Wife? What nonsense is this? The girl is promised to me." "The girl," Julian said, taking another step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is a lady, and she is under my protection. Any previous understanding is null and void. Is that clear?" He didn't raise the axe, didn't make a threatening move. He simply stood there, radiating an authority that was as natural to him as breathing. Grange took a half-step back, his bluster deflating in the face of such effortless dominance. This is highly irregular," he spluttered. "Her uncle will hear of this." "By all means tell him," Julian said, a cold smile touching his lips. "He can direct his correspondence to my estate in Surrey. I'm sure he'll be delighted to know his niece is marrying a marquis. Now, if you'll excuse us, you are trespassing." Grange stared, his face mottled with impotent rage. He shot a venomous look at Eleanor, who was standing as still as a statue, then mounted his horse and rode off without another word. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Julian turned to Eleanor. She was staring at him, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. But the fear was gone, replaced by something else, awe, and something warmer, something that made his chest feel strangely tight. "You were magnificent," she whispered. He looked down at the axe in his hands, then back at her. "Was I?" he asked quietly. "Or was I just playing a part?" The question hung between them, unanswered. The encounter with Grange changed the dynamic between them. The pretense of their engagement, once a fragile shield, now felt like a fortified wall. Eleanor's gratitude was palpable, and with it, her guilt seemed to grow. She began to talk more, to fill the silences with stories of her childhood, of her love for books and botany, of her quiet dreams that had never extended beyond escaping her uncle's machinations. Julian found himself listening, genuinely interested. He began to see the subtle beauty in her face, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of a favorite poem, the delicate curve of her smile when she managed to forget her fears. She was not a classic beauty, but she was real, and in his world of shadows, she was the only solid thing. He, in turn, tried to dredge up fragments of his past. He told her of the memory of riding, the feel of wind and freedom. He described the dark, faceless shadow from his dreams. I think I was not a good man," he confessed one evening as they sat by the fire. "The feeling I get from these memories is one of carelessness, of using people and discarding them. The man you describe, the one who rescued you, he sounds like a hero. I do not feel like a hero, Eleanor." She looked into the flames, her profile etched in gold. "People can change," she said softly. "Perhaps the accident. Perhaps it gave you a chance to become someone new. Or perhaps it just stripped away the artifice," he countered. "And this is who I always was underneath." He began to test the boundaries of his body and his mind. He took long walks around the cottage, pushing his still-healing head. He helped with chores, the manual labor a strange and satisfying novelty. And he started to read the books on her small shelf, volumes of poetry, history, philosophy. The words were familiar, the concepts understood, a testament to the education he must have had. It was a comforting reminder that not everything was lost. One day, he found a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of books. Curiosity getting the better of him, he opened it. It was Eleanor's, filled with delicate sketches of plants and birds, and interspersed with lines of poetry. His own name leaped out at him from one page, nestled in a verse that was not her own handwriting, but copied from another source. The lion preys on the timid hare, and Blackwood's gaze breeds deep despair. Hearts are his sport, and vows his jest. Leave him be, for you are not like the rest. He stared at the words. It was a snippet of gossip, a damning rhyme from a scandal sheet. It confirmed his deepest suspicions. The man he had been was a predator, a heartbreaker. The exact opposite of the devoted fiancé he was now pretending to be. He confronted her that evening, holding the journal open to the page. "Is this who I was, Eleanor? A man who bred deep despair?" She paled, her hand flying to her throat. "Where did you find that?" "The truth," he demanded, his voice hard. "I need to know the truth. Did we ever even meet before I woke up in these woods?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not look away. The weight of her deception, of the constant fear, finally broke her. "No," she whispered, the word a mere breath of sound. "No, we did not. I found you by the wreckage. I recognized you from society pages. I knew who you were, the infamous Marquess of Ashworth. And I was so desperate. I saw my chance to escape Grange, and I took it. I am so sorry, Julian. So terribly sorry." The confession should have enraged him. Instead, he felt a strange sense of relief. The foundation of lies was gone, and what was left was the raw, honest truth of their situation. He saw her not as a deceiver, but as a terrified young woman who had made a desperate choice. He saw the courage it had taken to care for a stranger, to spin a web of lies and then live within it under his constant scrutiny. He stepped closer, and for the first time, he reached out and touched her of his own volition, his fingers gently wiping a tear from her cheek. Her skin was soft, and the simple contact sent a jolt through him. "Then we start from here," he said, his voice low. "From the truth. My name is Julian Blackwood. I have no memory. You are Eleanor Hartwell. You are in trouble. And it seems I am now, for all intents and purposes, your fiancé. Let us see this through together." In that moment, looking into her tear-filled eyes, the pretense began to transform into something perilously close to reality. The world, in the form of Julian's past, arrived with the thunder of hoofbeats and the gleam of polished brass. A carriage, emblazoned with a crest he did not recognize but felt in his bones, pulled up outside the cottage. A young woman, perhaps 18, with jet-black hair and Julian's same piercing blue eyes, erupted from it before the footman could even lower the steps. "Julian!" she cried, rushing towards him as he stood, frozen, in the cottage doorway. "We heard the most ridiculous rumor that you'd been killed in a carriage accident. And then that you'd been seen in Hertfordshire, living in some hovel with a woman." Her gaze swept over Eleanor, who had appeared behind him, and her expression shifted from relief to horrified disbelief. This, he knew instantly, was his sister Beatrice. Behind her, a man emerged from the carriage. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a handsome, composed face and watchful eyes. "Ashworth," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "Thank God you're alive. The ton has been in an uproar." Julian's mind raced. He had no memory of this man, but the way he carried himself, the proprietary tone, sparked an immediate and intense dislike. Beatrice threw her arms around Julian. "You look terrible. And what is this about you being engaged?" She pulled back, her eyes narrowing at Eleanor. To her, "Beatrice," Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. He gently extricated himself from her embrace. "This is Miss Eleanor Hartwell. And yes, we are engaged." The man stepped forward, offering a gloved hand to Julian, which he ignored, and then to Eleanor, who took it hesitantly. "Lord Peregrine Vane," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "An old friend of your brother's, Lady Beatrice, and a devoted admirer of your family." His gaze lingered on Eleanor a moment too long. "Miss Hartwell, a pleasure to meet the woman who has finally managed to tame the untamable." The words were polite, but the implication was a sneer. Julian felt a protective surge so strong it startled him. He moved slightly, positioning himself more squarely between Vane and Eleanor. It is a complicated situation, Julian said. I have been unwell. So we see, Vane murmured, his eyes taking in the humble cottage. You must return to London with us at once. The doctors there are the best. This rustic convalescence has surely gone on long enough. I am not sure that is advisable, Julian said. He felt Eleanor's hand lightly touch his back, a silent gesture of support that grounded him. Not advisable? Beatrice exclaimed. Julian, you are the Marquess of Ashworth. You cannot hide away in the country with some. She seemed to struggle for a word that was not outright insulting. With the woman I love, Julian finished, his voice firm and clear. The words, once a lie, now felt like the truest thing he had said in weeks. He felt Eleanor's fingers press harder against his back. Vane's smile was thin and sharp. Love, my dear Ashworth, that is a novel concept for you. Come, let us not discuss this in the road. Invite us in, and we can speak like civilized people. There was nothing to do but acquiesce. The next hour was a torturous exercise in deception and tension. Beatrice fired questions at Eleanor about her family, her background, the details of their courtship. Eleanor, fortified by Julian's presence and their new pact of truth, answered with a quiet dignity, sticking as close to the facts as possible without revealing her initial deception. She spoke of her uncle, of the match with Grange, and of how Julian had offered her a way out. An elopement? Beatrice was aghast. How perfectly dramatic. And utterly unlike you, Julian. Vane said little, merely watched, his eyes missing nothing. He watched Julian's protective posture, the way his gaze kept returning to Eleanor, the unfamiliar softness in the Rake's usually cynical expression. Finally, as they prepared to leave, Vane took Julian aside. A word, Ashworth? In private. They walked a short distance from the cottage. Vane's pleasant facade dropped. What game are you playing, Julian? This little mouse is not your style. I know you. The Julian Blackwood I know would rather throw himself from a cliff than be leg-shackled to a penniless nobody. The words were meant to provoke, to trigger some memory of their former camaraderie. But they only solidified Julian's dislike. People change, Perry. Do they? Vane's smile was cold. Or do they just hit their heads and become someone else? Be careful, my friend. You are vulnerable. There are those who would take advantage. His gaze flickered back towards the cottage. I will see you in London soon. This farce cannot last. As the carriage pulled away, Julian felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Lord Peregrine Vane was not a friend. He was a threat, and he had just been given a front-row seat to Julian's greatest vulnerability. The visit from Beatrice and Vane shattered the fragile peace of the cottage. The outside world had intruded, and with it, the pressure to resume a life he couldn't remember. Letters began to arrive, from his solicitors, from friends he didn't know, from debt collectors. Each one was a piece of a puzzle that depicted a man of extravagant tastes, volatile temper, and profound irresponsibility. A man who gambled staggering sums, who left a trail of broken hearts and angry husbands in his wake. A man who was deeply in debt. The portrait that emerged was of a monster. The man in the gossip columns rhyme was real. He shared his findings with Eleanor, their evenings now spent by the fire with the damning correspondence spread between them. It seems I was worse than you could have possibly imagined, he said grimly, holding up a letter from a moneylender. The estate is mortgaged to the hilt. I've been living on credit and charm for years. Eleanor looked at him, her expression not one of judgment, but of sorrow. This is not who you are now. Isn't it? He argued, a familiar restlessness taking hold. These instincts are in me, Eleanor. The need for speed, the impatience, the darkness. It's all there, just beneath the surface. I am trying to be the man you need me to be, the devoted fiancé. But what if that man is just another fiction? What if, when my memory returns, I go back to being that? Then you will have a choice to make, she said simply. The man I know, the man who stood up to Silas Grange, who protects me, who reads poetry and splits firewood without complaint. That man is real, Julian. He is right here. Her faith in him was a terrifying weight. He began to have more memories, sharp and painful. The scent of a particular perfume, jasmine, that made his stomach clench with a mixture of desire and revulsion. The taste of expensive brandy. The sound of dice rattling on a felt table. And Vane was always there, in the periphery of these memories, handing him a glass, slapping his back, pointing out a new beauty across a crowded room. He remembered a fight. A furious argument with a man in a study, the details blurred, but the feeling of white-hot rage was crystalline. He remembered the man's face, contorted in anger. It was his own father. The memories did not bring clarity, only conflict. The man of his past and the man of his present were at war within him. The breaking point came when a London newspaper arrived, delivered by a special messenger. On the society page was a short, vicious item. Is the wolf truly tamed? The Marquess of long the most predatory of our set, has been discovered rusticating in Hertfordshire, reportedly engaged to a Miss H, a lady of no particular fortune or distinction. While some whisper of a reformed character, those who know him best suspect a darker motive. Could this be an elaborate wager? A cruel jest played upon an innocent? Or perhaps a strategic retreat from his mountainous debts? Lord P.V., when questioned, would only smile enigmatically and say, "My friend Julian has always had a unique sense of humor." The ton watches and waits for the punchline. Julian crushed the paper in his fist. Vane's work, without a doubt. A poison pen letter designed to destroy Eleanor's reputation and lure him back into the fold. Eleanor read it, her face ashen. "They think it's a joke," she whispered. "They think I am a joke." "No," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. The rage he felt was pure and protective. It was not the careless anger of his past, but a focused, righteous fury. "This ends now. We are going to London." "London? But why?" "To face them," he said, pulling her to her feet. "To face my past, my debts, and my so-called friends. If I am to be the Marquess of Ashworth, then I will be the Marquess on my own terms. And the first order of business is to introduce my beautiful, intelligent, and utterly respectable fiancé to society and silence these rumors once and for all." He looked down at her, at the fear and hope warring in her eyes, and he knew, with a certainty that eclipsed all his doubts, that he was not playing a part anymore. The devotion was real. The love was real. "Will you come with me?" he asked. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. The quiet wallflower was gone, replaced by a woman of steel. "Yes," she said. "I will." London was a sensory assault. The noise, the smells, the sheer press of humanity were overwhelming. Julian's townhouse was a palace of marble and gilt, a monument to his former decadence. It felt cold, impersonal, and haunted by the ghost of the man he used to be. He threw himself into the Herculean task of setting his life in order. He met with his solicitors, his face a mask of grim determination as he confronted the staggering extent of his debts. He began the process of selling off unentailed properties, liquidating assets, and cutting every unnecessary expense. The Rake was becoming a man of business, and the ton watched, stunned. But the main event was the ball. It was Beatrice's idea. "If you are serious about this, you must present her to society. A grand ball here, at Ashworth House. There is no other way." Julian agreed. It was a battlefield, and he would choose the ground. The night of the ball, the house blazed with light. The cream of society flocked to see the spectacle, the infamous Rake and his mysterious, plain fiancée. Julian stood at the top of the grand staircase, his heart pounding, dressed in the formal black and white of evening wear. He felt like an imposter in his own skin. Then Eleanor appeared. She was a vision. She wore a gown of deep sapphire blue that made her twilight eyes seem luminous. Her mousy brown hair was styled in an elegant chignon, with a few soft curls framing her face. She was not dressed in the frills and furbelows of a debutante, but with a simple, elegant grace that made every other woman in the room look overdone. She looked, for the first time, not like a wallflower, but like a lady. His lady. He offered her his arm. "You are breathtaking," he whispered. She gave him a small, nervous smile. "I feel like I'm walking to the gallows." "Then we shall go together," he said, and led her down the stairs. The ballroom was a sea of curious, critical faces. He could feel their stares, hear the whispers behind fans. He saw Vane standing near the fireplace, a smirk playing on his lips. Julian ignored him. He led Eleanor to the center of the floor, and as the music began, he took her in his arms for their first waltz. It was a declaration of war. He was an excellent dancer, his body remembering the steps even if his mind did not. He guided her effortlessly, his focus entirely on her. "Look at no one but me," he murmured. "They do not matter. Only this. Only us." She relaxed in his arms, her trust in him absolute. As they moved together, the world seemed to fade away. In that moment, under the glittering chandeliers, the pretense was gone. The devotion in his eyes was not feigned. The love in her heart was not hidden. It was real, and it was powerful enough to silence the whispers, if only for a moment. After the waltz, the crowd descended. They were polite, but the questions were pointed, the scrutiny intense. Eleanor, to Julian's immense pride, handled it with a quiet poise that disarmed them all. She did not simper or flirt. She spoke intelligently about books and politics, her quiet confidence a stark contrast to the vapid chatter of the ton. It was during a conversation with a group of older, influential dowagers that Vane made his move. He sidled up to Julian, a glass of champagne in his hand. "A remarkable performance, Julian," Vane said, his voice low. "I almost believe it myself. But the game is up. I know why you're really doing this." Julian turned a cold gaze on him. "Do enlighten me, Perry." "The debt," Vane said, his smile turning nasty. "The one you owe me. The one you lost to me the night before your accident. The one you signed over the deed to your favorite hunting lodge to cover. Or have you forgotten that, too?" A memory, sharp and clear, slammed into Julian. The feel of cards in his hand. The reckless raise. The final, devastating turn of the card. Vane's triumphant smile. The scrawl of his own signature on a piece of paper. The staggering sum. The lodge. It was all true. Vane saw the recognition in his eyes and pressed his advantage. "I've been patient, but my patience is at an end. Call off this farcical engagement. Return to your senses. Pay me what you owe, or I will call in your markers and ruin you completely. This little wallflower of yours will be the laughingstock of London when she's thrown into debtor's prison with you." The threat was real. The financial ruin was one thing, but the destruction of Eleanor's reputation, her life, was another. This was the final confrontation. The shadow from his dreams had a face, and it was Lord Peregrine Vane. Julian looked across the room at Eleanor, who was smiling at something one of the dowagers had said. She looked happy. She looked safe. He would not let Vane destroy that. He turned back to Vane, his expression one of icy calm. "Very well, Perry. You shall have your money. Meet me in the card room. One hand. Double or nothing. My lodge against my entire debt to you." Vane's eyes lit up with avaricious glee. He could not resist. The gamble was in his blood, and the chance to utterly break Julian was too tempting. "You always were a fool, Julian. I accept." The card room fell silent as Julian and Vane took their seats at the green felt table. A crowd gathered, sensing blood in the water. This was the Julian Blackwood they remembered, reckless, arrogant, betting everything on a single turn of a card. Eleanor, hearing the whispers, pushed her way to the front. Her face was pale, but her eyes were determined. She came to stand behind Julian's chair, a silent show of support. Vane smirked. "Shall we let the lady bring you luck, Ashworth?" "We shall see," Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. The game was vingt-et-un. The cards were dealt. Julian's face was a mask, but his mind was racing. He remembered everything now. Not just the gambling, the debts, the women, but the emptiness of it all. The hollow pursuit of pleasure. The casual cruelty. He remembered the argument with his father, who had called him a wastrel and a disappointment. He remembered the profound loneliness that had driven him into Vane's toxic company. He looked at his cards. A 9 and a 7. 16. A terrible hand. Vane, showing a king, smiled. "Stick or twist, Julian?" The old Julian would have twisted. He would have chased the high, the risk. He would have lost everything. He looked up at Eleanor. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw not fear, but absolute faith. She believed in the man he was now, not the man he had been. He looked at his cards, then at the large pile of markers representing his debt. He thought of the cold, empty townhouse, the meaningless possessions, the shallow life. And then he thought of the small, warm cottage, the scent of herbs, the quiet companionship, the profound, soul-deep connection he had found with Eleanor. He was not that man anymore. He slid his cards face down across the table. "I stand," he said quietly. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a conservative, un-Julian-like move. Vane's smile widened. He turned over his whole card. A 6. He had 16 as well. He had to take another card. He flicked the deck. A 10. 26. He had bust. A collective gasp filled the room. Julian had won. Not by chasing a win, but by refusing to lose. Vane's face was a thundercloud of fury and disbelief. You bluffed. You had nothing." "I had everything to lose," Julian said, standing up. He gathered the markers. "The debt is cleared. Our association is at an end, Vane. You are no longer welcome in my home or my life." He turned his back on the sputtering lord and faced Eleanor. The crowd was staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and newfound respect. The reckless Rake was gone. In his place was a man of strength, principle, and control. He took Eleanor's hand. "Let's go home," he said. "But," "This is your home," she said, confused. He looked around the opulent, cold ballroom, then back at her, his eyes full of a love that had rewritten his very soul. "No, Eleanor. Home is wherever you are." They did not return to the cottage, but they did not stay in the cold townhouse either. Julian used the momentum of his victory to complete his reformation. He sold the London house, along with several other non-essential properties, and paid off every last debt. He invested what was left, ensuring a stable, if more modest, future. He found a small, comfortable estate in the country, not far from Eleanor's cottage. It had a good library, stables for the horses he now remembered he loved, and gardens where Eleanor could cultivate her plants. They were married there in a small, simple ceremony. Beatrice stood as Julian's witness, her initial hostility towards Eleanor having melted into a grudging respect and then a genuine sisterly affection. She had seen her brother become a better man, and for that, she could only be grateful. As they stood at the altar, Julian looked at his bride. There were no more lies between them, no more pretense. Just the profound truth of a love that had been born from desperation and forged in fire. "I remember everything now," he whispered to her as they exchanged vows. "The good and the bad. And I know that the greatest fortune of my life was losing my memory on that road, because it led me to you. You are my redemption, Eleanor. You are my remembrance of what truly matters." She smiled, her twilight eyes shining with tears of joy. "And you are my courage, Julian. You are my always." The man who had once been a rake, and the wallflower who had dared to claim him, stepped into their future together, not as a pretense, but as a promise forever kept.